So, our keynoter this morning is the Reverend Mike Piazza. Mike Piazza is currently the senior pastor of Virginia Highland Church in Atlanta. Mike has the wonderful distinction of growing every church he's ever pastored. Beginning in churches that numbered around 24 to, at one point, the dean of the Cathedral of Hope with 4,000 members. Mike has continually found ways to reinvent himself as a pastor in order to meet the needs of the community that he is in the expressions of faith that are right for our time. Mike is an agile leader, reinventing himself and his church, and focusing his skills on all ever new adventures. He was the keynoter at our New England Ecumenical Stewardship event a couple of years ago. I first met him when I heard him speak at a gathering at the National UCC offices in Cleveland more than 10 years ago now. And Mike is a dynamic speaker and a wonderfully practical sort of theologian who I'm also honored to call my friend. Please welcome Mike Piazza.
Thank you all for being here. I have an hour this morning and an hour this afternoon, and I have about 10 hours worth of material to present to you. So you'll forgive me if I sort of skip over the niceties and get to it, because I suspect that's why you came actually anyway. And I hope that my homiletics professor died last week, Fred Craddock. And Fred taught me through his writing and through his style and through his example that no matter what you say as a preacher, it really doesn't matter. What matters is what people hear. And so I'm going to hope that in the 2 hours or so that we get to spend together, and I hope we get to spend together sometime between then, what I say, you won't take too terribly seriously. But what you hear, you will take very seriously, because the wisdom and the goodness out of this time together will come from the inside of you. It is what Fred called overhearing the gospel. And so I hope you will overhear the gospel. I'm really glad to be here for this event. I love the idea of recalculating the way. In fact, one of the things that I've been trying to put together some material around is the reinvention. Reinventing yourself as a church and reinventing yourself as a leader, and how that has to happen not only in this generation, but it has had to happen in every generation. It just has to happen a lot in this generation. It has to happen quickly. In addition to being the senior pastor at the Virginia Highland Church, which was a teeny tiny little church when I got there. It's not quite so tiny now, and so it's taking a little bit more of my time than I thought. I am doing some work around the country with a group called Agile Church. You'll be hearing a lot about it because we're producing what I think will be, at last, software that will actually help churches to grow. But as I talk today, if you have questions, ideas, want copies of things, if you will email me at that email address, I will certainly respond. I'll provide the email address again at the end of both presentations, so we'll be able to stay in touch. But that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. If you want copies of anything, I know that at some points there'll be lots of things at which you'll try to take notes, and I'll move way too fast. Just send me an email. I'll send you the copy of it. I'm happy to do that because I really am glad you're here. You're probably here for a variety of reasons, but I'll tell you the truth. The church is here because we're trying to figure out how to refill these pews that we have that are all too often too vacant. Whether you are Episcopalian or Congregationalist, it doesn't actually matter. We are all part of a declining experience. And so how do we do this? How do we get people to come back and share what we think is a great, great gift? Because it is. How do we tell them, though? As I travel around and folks want me to work with them, most often they say, we want you to help us figure out how to attract young couples with children. That's what every church wants. If I said, okay, I'll be a consultant for you for a weekend, that's exactly the first thing you would ask me to do. And I would say, forget it. Because that's not where your starting point should be. In fact, if that's your point, to try to attract new people, you're much better off thinking about how do we attract empty nesters. Those are the folks who are tending to reclaim church at this particular moment in history. Once upon a time, that's what we used to do. That when people went off and got married and started having children, then they started reclaiming church. They started coming back. No more. And so what we're trying to do is repeat a period of history that has moved on. What we could do is reinvent ourselves and realize that the people who are looking for churches right now, the people who are looking for community, the people who are looking for ways to give their life meaning and purpose are the empty nesters. They are hungering for what you are offering. And that's the place to start. Yes, of course, we all want families with children as well. But if I were to suggest to you a strategy, that would be the general strategy that I would suggest. Now, the truth of the matter is we have to reinvent ourselves in such a way that millennials will, sooner or later, hopefully, come back to church. Because, unfortunately, the empty nesters are short-termers like me. I mean, we're going to be around for a little while, but, you you can't stake your future on 60, 70-year-olds. You've got to stake it on a little bit younger. So we've got to figure out this next generation as well. And so we've got to begin asking, who are they? And there is a ton of information out there. And so what I suggest that you do, leadership is always being a step ahead of where people are. And so you've got to be a step ahead of who you're trying to attract back to church by worship. And so the millennials are the step ahead. Leadership is one step ahead, martyrdom is 2 steps ahead. So let's not get too far out there, but we do, as we begin to try to reclaim empty nesters, we also do need to think about who the millennials are and to be ready for them when they do begin to reclaim church, because I believe that they will. So who are they and what are they looking for in a local church? I want to talk about that really quickly. This is my list of the study that I have done. Now, this is I can't say read this and this will tell you this, because this is the sort of compilation of a dozen things. Millennials, postmodern folks are looking for communities with fluid boundaries. That is, they are not looking for churches that say, this is who we are. The churches, in my tradition, many of our congregations were German churches. And some still, a few of us still do, midnight mass in German even. But those kind of churches, of course, have passed away. Our boundaries are not quite that obvious anymore. But all too often we have too many of them. And that is not what postmodern folks are looking for. They want fluid boundaries. They want to know lots of different kinds of people. They want to worship with lots of different ages of people. They want to worship with people who are different races. They're looking for fluid boundaries. Interactive participation, the kind of stuff that we're about to do for this next hour, me talking and you listening, no. That's not what they're looking for. And so we've got to learn how to invite people to participate. And it can't just simply be responding to a litany as it's written in the bulletin. We've got to have them, or the prayer book, we've got to have ways in which their voice can actually be heard. I realize that some of you are getting like the willies just even thinking about that, especially my Episcopal friends. But we gotta find some new ways to let different voices be heard. Last summer I did this whole other thing. The little church that I'm serving is very liturgical. You Episcopal folks don't have anything on us. We process every morning. I wear an alb, and on holy days chasuble, and we do communion every. So it's but in the summer I knew that what I needed to do is figure out another way to do this sort of a conversational sermon. It even made me nervous, and I'm really pretty good at it. So I get that this is going to be out of our comfort zones in lots of ways, but they want to participate. They want mysticism, mystery, awe. They don't want us to stand there and explain the diagram of the Holy Land and where this border exactly. They don't care. And if they did care, they've got BeliefNet. They can Google it on their smartphone quicker than you can describe it to them. So just don't bother, all right? They believe, the clergy, they believe you actually have a seminary degree. They'll just cede that to you. That you have advanced education in this area, you don't have to prove it. They want you to walk them into the space of the holy. That's what they're looking for. A place where they can discover help, Help for their families, help for their relationship, help for figuring out their vocation, their call in life. Hope in a world where all the news seems to be bad. And it seems that our media is invested in making it sound worse than it actually is, which in some cases is hard to do. They want to find meaning for their life. They're looking for something when they come to church. And we need to be asking what that is. A community that is doing good in the world. They've got Starbucks. They don't need to sit around and drink coffee. They are also not lonely. They're not, retired from their job with their children gone. They're not lonely. And all too much of what passes as fellowship, a wretched word we should ban from the church, all too often which passes as that is meeting the needs of folks who are lonely. They are not lonely. They want to come together as a community, but they want this to have meaning and purpose and direction and a cause and something we can do. And that's the best way to build that kind of community. A place to feel centered and central. That's the other thing. It needs to be about them, but it also needs to be a place where they can feel centered. And finally, art and beauty. They want something other evoked from within them. So that's what this generation is looking for. It is church, or it could be church. And I think that is the good news. If we don't understand this good news, the decline of our denominations will continue until there will in fact be more Elvis impersonators than there will be Episcopalians or Congregationalists. So that's not something that either of us want. And so what I want to do is I realize that those of you that some of my UCC friends have heard me do this. So I'm going to run through it really, really quickly, but I wanted to give it to you again as background. There are three things that I've discovered recently that are really important that may help lower some of your anxiety about church. The first is that while church attendance is declining, it is the new normal. If you'll notice back in the 1776, when many of these Congregationalist and Episcopal churches were founded, the percentage of people who attended church was very, very low. It went up and reached a peak in the 60s. So that was wonderful. But we are not going back to the 60s. What we actually are going to go back to is a fairly normal thing. That will mean that some of our churches will close, but it does not mean that the church is going to die. We are not dying. We are returning to a different normal, and that's just the way it is. There will be future revivals and renewals and times when the church will come back alive in phenomenal ways, but that is not normative. It is not a social norm. So let's relax a little bit, okay? The Church of Jesus Christ is not dying. We are resetting for a different age, and so let's be okay with that. The second thing is that one of the second things that's happened in the church, I think, is the shifting role of women. And I talked a lot about this, but we have more women priests and pastors now. More of the people in this room are women in some ways, but in other ways, not. Used to at a gathering like this, you'd see a lot of men, male pastors in ties and in collars, and but here, most of the folks in the room are women. That's a different sort of thing. And many of the folks in this room are women of a certain generation, I'll just say. And that generation was the greatest gift the church has received in the modern era. What happened was, after World War II, women who had gone to factories and offices and farms to work while the men had gone to war, when the men came back, the women went to church. And they revived the church in a way that we have never seen before and may never see again since. These extraordinarily, exquisitely gifted leaders came and started programs and ministries and made the church what it was in the 50s and 60s. It wasn't so much World War II that revived the church, because World War I didn't do it. Even the Civil War didn't do it. What did it were the women who came to church and made it the most powerful institution on the planet for an era. But it was just an era that will not come again. And so that is simply the way it is. So to try to recapture who the church was in its glory days is to ignore that women have a different role in society now, and to be grateful for that. But that's just the way it is. And the final thing is we have more, the third thing is we have more competition. There are just more things going on. Even among older people, we're just frantically busy. Sports are happening on Sunday morning, and Starbucks is happening on Sunday morning, or whatever the coffee shop is in your community. Folks are going there and sitting there and reading the New York Times and drinking coffee, and that's their version of church. So there's all of that sort of thing. The other thing, and this is the most powerful thing. Well, I mean, the women shifting probably was the most powerful. This is the other powerful thing. People attend less, period. They attend church less, they attend theater less, they attend opera less, they attend Rotary less, they attend everything less. It is simply the way it is. It is a cultural shift that we need to say. So if you look at this chart, what it's saying is that if your church has 400 members and has had 400 members, you've stayed strong and healthy, and you've got the same, you've got the same number of members you had in 2001. You have the same number of members you had in 1991. You have the same number of members you had in 1981. Nothing has changed. You're still that same strong 400-member church. Nothing has changed except attendance. And this is how it has gone. Now, let me just say, you haven't experienced the worst of this yet. I know you paid me to come and bring you good news, didn't you? So, but this is, those of your churches that still have a lot of 70, 80-year-olds, you still have people who are coming to church every single week. I have a young woman in my church, Blanche, and Miss Blanche has been a member of that church for 89 years. She is there every Sunday. Every year we give an award to the person who attends the most frequently, and Miss Blanche wins the award. She is there every Sunday. But there aren't a lot of her. I'd give anything if I had a church just full of her. But it's not true. The people who I've attracted to this church, the new folks, are all younger, with children, and some of them are empty nesters, and they come. They are faithful, regular attenders, and they come every 6 weeks, probably. I'm teaching a confirmation class tomorrow in my church, and I'm looking down the list of people, and I keep going back to my assistant saying, now, who is this? And he's been here like 6 times. I've been there 4 years. He's been there 6 times. But he's joining the church because he thinks he's an active church member. This couple, I know I've never seen this couple before in my life. Oh, yeah, they've been here 3 times. 3 times, and they're joining the church because it's their church. That's the new definition. That is where we are going. I know you haven't gotten there yet. You're beginning to experience the edge of that. But this is where we're going. And so it could be for the fear of God in you. The real decline of the church is this. I have someone I met, actually not a friend, who owns a theater. And she said, I asked her, well, how's it going? And she said, it is the best of times and the worst of times. We sell out the entire season. So financially, we are doing great. But there'll be performances when there are a dozen people in the audience. They'll buy tickets and not come. And there are people who are going to be committed to you. So last Sunday, I had my church council meeting, and the treasurer said, we're great. All this money is coming in, and we're way ahead of budget, and all this stuff. It's like, really? Because it feels like nobody's coming to church. And she said, they're not, but they're sending their money. It's just a staggering thing. They're auto givers. We got all signed up. One of the things I taught at the stewardship was to get them. And so they're all auto givers, and they send their money. They just don't send their kids. It drives me crazy. But it is the new reality, and it's going to become increasingly your new reality. I have hit it like crazy because all of these people who are coming to my church, except for Miss Blanche, are all new people. And so they're acting like new people are going to act. Just be warned. This is the way, even in Vermont, it's going to be. People are going to be out on the lake on Sunday rather than in your pews. And that'll be increasingly. So what do? You have 2 options. You can increase membership or you can increase frequency. And you better be doing both of those things. I wish I had time to talk about how to do that. But worship is going to be one of those primary ways to do that. There is some hope, and I want you to not leave here without knowing that. So, recognizing that hope is a dangerous thing, I want to try to give you a little bit of that today. I do believe that the promise that God made in the prophecy of Jeremiah is yours. God has given you a future, with hope. The question is, how do you take hold of that? And worship is the principal answer. I just spent a week teaching worship with the Unitarian Universalists, which was an interesting experience. Every time I went to say Jesus, I just said justice, and we got along just fine. But even for the Unitarians, they recognize that the front door of church is still worship. And so if our church is going to have a future with hope, worship is going to be it. And so let's talk about some of the ways in which that is so. I always want to make sure that I am clear that one size fits some. This is not going to be one size fits all, and particularly not in a group of Congregationalists and Episcopalians. So somebody just tell me, are Vermont Episcopalians like high church Episcopalians, mid-church Episcopalians, or low church Episcopalians? Yes. Exactly. That is exactly right. And this is really my point, is that if we're going to reach this new generation, and if we're going to motivate people to start coming to church more often, we're going to have to figure out ways to do this that are creative. One size fits some. And so all too often, it would be easy enough to say the Episcopal Church, the problem is that you have this Book of Common Prayer and you do the same thing every Sunday. But I could be talking to the Congregationalist. Because you don't have a Book of Common Prayer, you do the same thing every Sunday. And one of the things I want to say about worship is that's not going to work. They want to come and feel like it feels familiar, it feels like church, it smells like church. But if they get it, and they're gone. If they think you're going to do the same thing this week that you did last week, they're not nearly as motivated to come back as previous generations are. Not because they don't value it, they value it, but they got it. And they don't need to repeat the lesson. They do, actually. They need to repeat it until it becomes a part of their DNA. I get all that. But there is no awareness in the world of that value. And so you have to slip it in on them. You've got to trick them. You've got to do it in the same thing every single Sunday until it becomes a part of their DNA, but you have to make them think it's not the same thing. It's got to sound a little different, or look a little different, or feel a little different. But what you're doing is implanting in them the gospel, and you're doing it week after week after week, as the church has for millennia. But you got to be creative about it. So it's going to be different from church to church. There are going to be high churches and low churches, and that's going to be the way it is. It's going to be different. It needs to be different from week to week. I'm not suggesting revolution, but you've got to make it feel enough different that people think if they miss church, they missed something. Not that they missed something that they got last week or they're going to get next week. They could get it next week. They've got to feel like they've missed something. People have to go out there talking about it. And in the coffee shops and at work, people will say, "Oh, God, I'm sorry, I wasn't there." When was the last time somebody said that about your place? That they felt like they'd missed something? You've got to figure out ways to do that. And it's got to be different within a church. That is, you've got to help people find different, I think we're going to have to start doing different services. Even though, ironically, our attendance is lower, one size fits some. And so we're going to have to figure out ways to make the early service feel more formal, and the second service feel more casual, and the third service feel more child-friendly, or those sorts of things. We have to do things on other alternative nights of the week. It used to be that Sunday morning was your time. You had it. You belonged to the church. But not anymore. So when is the most free time of the week that we might have a different kind of worship experience? And then it's got to be different within each service. And I want to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about that. Did any of you know about multiple intelligences? Oh, you're smarter than I am. I knew nothing. But this is something we need to learn something about, because worship has got to figure out how to speak to different people's intelligences. We all are all of these things. But we also are all mostly one or maybe two of them. And what we keep acting like is that everybody hears and sees and smells and feels worship in the same exact way. We treat people like they are exactly alike. And it simply is not. And so we've got to begin to recognize this. Howard Gardner's done some work with that. I want you just to listen to him for just a second, what he talks about.
Dr. Howard Gardner is an American psychologist and senior director at Harvard University. He has received numerous awards and is known around the world for his theory of multiple intelligences.
The idea of multiple intelligences comes out of psychology. It's a theory that was developed to document the fact that human beings have very different kinds of intellectual strengths, and that these strengths are very, very important in how kids learn, and how people represent things in their minds, and then how people use them in order to show what it is that they've understood. If we all had exactly the same kind of mind and there was only one kind of intelligence, then we could teach everybody the same thing in the same way.
Let's take a look at the 8 unique intelligences Gardner suggests. How do you learn best? Perhaps you will identify with one or more of the following intelligences. Mozart, U2, and Michael Jackson all had an ear for music. Those adept at reading, composing, and playing music may possess musical intelligence. Meet the needs of this intelligence by incorporating song and rhythm into your classroom. Does architecture and photography interest you? Can you find your way with a map and compass? People who love pictures, puzzles, and maps are often considered to be spatially intelligent. Incorporate these elements into your classroom to meet spatial needs. Take a nature walk, watch tadpoles morph into frogs, or study the Great Barrier Reef. These are all great examples of how to meet the needs of the naturalist intelligence. Studying the natural world is how the naturalists work. Do you keep a journal? Do people say you have a way with words? Those with linguistic intelligence, or word smarts, may enjoy learning new vocabulary or investigating word origins. Get moving, do the robot, play a sport, or act out a novel. These are all ways those with bodily kinesthetic intelligence use their gifts. Considered daydreaming to some, critical thinking is the cornerstone of intrapersonal intelligence. This type of intelligence is useful in the classroom as students analyze essays and deconstruct arguments. Excellent listening skills, the disdain for injustice, and empathy are all characteristics of the interpersonally intelligent. Conversation with others keep these students engaged. And finally, once considered the main concept of intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence encompasses a love of problem solving and strength of math and logic. The advancements of science and technology will never be enough for this intelligence.
So how do we take worship and make sure that we speak to all 8 of these? Now, you probably have worth looking at that and thinking, oh, well, maybe that's who I am, or that's who I am, or that is who I am. The problem is that we act as if everybody is one of these things. Now, we do have a lot of folks who are verbal and linguistic, and that's a good thing that there's a lot of those folks in the world, because that's what church does. We pour a lot of words and language at people. We do include music and rhythmic, so that does invite people in. But is it the music and rhythm of my generation? Probably not, unless you're, a 19th century German, at least in the case of Congregationalists. And so some of these Anglican, I grew up United Methodist and was United Methodist clergy person, so John and Charles Wesley speak to me, and their hymns speak to me, and my daughters glaze over completely when we're doing that. So though we include music, one of the songs, Take Me As I Am, that we sang a little bit of today, my congregation, every Sunday after the sermon, there's a time, during Lent, after the sermon there's a time of silence, and out of that silence we sing that. And we sing it several times, like we try to sing it 5 or 6 times until eventually the musicians drop out and the congregation's voices are just chanting it, and they're no longer thinking about the words or the music, but their soul is free. Their left brain is occupied singing this 7-word chant, and their soul is freed to experience that time of worship. It's a wholly different way of doing it. And you know who love it? The young people. They love the kind of music that comes from Tizé or Iona, or even some praise and worship music. We do it for a season and we stop doing it. They're the ones who will ask, when are we going to sing that song that goes, and then they'll sing it to me. I mean, when was the last time a college student came up to you and wanted a piece of liturgy to be returned to worship? We've got to pay attention to this sort of stuff. The logical, all of that. We need to think, we can spend the rest of our day just going through the 8 of these and talking about ways in which we can incorporate them in the liturgy of worship. You can't do all of them every Sunday, but we need to figure out ways. So the spatial one. So many of our buildings have things that are really interesting and unique and stimulating, but how do we change that up? How do we bring in new kinds of art, new pieces of fabric, new ways? We could spend the rest of the day talking about this, and I hope you'll spend the rest of your lives thinking about it, and think about worship in a different kind of way. One of the ways in which you can't do all 8 of those things you just exhaust yourself, but one of the things we have to begin thinking about is how we layer those things. And Marcia McPhee, so you're going to hear a lot of Marcia McPhee this morning because I just spent a week with her. It's like, okay, Marcia, I'm just on overload here, so I'm going to give you a little bit of what Marcia taught me, I guess, or reminded me. One of the things that she calls on us to do is to layer worship, and to not make it all words coming at people, read, sung, spoken. How do you layer that? And so she talks a little bit about this, and I want you to hear her.
Layering is when words and environment and symbol and action and music and sequence and color and lighting and timing are all working together. Now, this may seem very complex, but it's not really, all right? Because we're going to give you an example. But years ago, I asked myself, who is utilizing this technique, this sensory-rich storytelling technique in the most provocative ways in our day? And my answer to myself was, I believe that it's filmmakers. I believe filmmakers are telling incredible stories in incredible ways. And so I thought that I would go on a little adventure called Think Like a Filmmaker, and I began to interview filmmakers about their art form to see what I could learn as a worship designer and leader about telling stories. So I'm going to share just a little bit with you today about that. We're going to do that by looking at a film clip. But before we do, take a look at these two groups of people encountering a story. Now, one of my first questions to filmmakers was about our willingness to enter a story. How long and why? You know, I began to say, when I go to a movie, I expect to be there for a couple hours. I paid $12, And if it's, an hour, I'm like, excuse me? But we get into worship and we go, And I began to think, why does an hour sometimes in worship feels like so much longer than 2 hours at a really good movie? Well, the first thing filmmakers told me is that as soon as you begin to segment time into little pieces, time seems longer. And so one of the things they spend lots of time doing is making sure that once they start that story, it flows from one scene to the next. And I thought, you know what? That's why I've become such a stickler for transitions in worship. And why in some circles I'm known as the flow queen. Because I spend so much time thinking about not just the pieces of worship, but how we get from one to another. That ought to be just as important as making sure the pieces are in place, is how are we creating worship not as a checklist of things to do, but as a spiritual journey and a spiritual experience from beginning to end. We've got to spend time doing that.
Okay, so we're going to come back to that in this afternoon session, the transition piece, because I think that really is critical. But it is that to think like a filmmaker. Not for the sermon, I have to work at that every Sunday, but for the entire experience. How do we craft from the moment a person drives into our parking lot, if you have parking, which I don't, so I'm a little resentful of those who do, but from the moment they drive into the parking lot until the moment they get back in their car, how do we craft for them a multi-layered experience that speaks to the multiple intelligences of people? How do we layer all that? Every industry asks these questions. The fashion industry tries to figure out, what looks good on top. And so you go to a department store or to a clothing store, and they'll have displays with stuff layered so that you see what it sort of looks like together. And suddenly you went there to buy a jacket, but you see it paired with this sweater, and you got to have it too. And so this sort of layering. And New Englanders, more about layering clothes than we Southerners do, but there's some practical reasons for that apparently here. And music. There's some great. If we had time, I'd show you some clips of music where a single instrument is played, and then another on top, and then another on top, and we did a little bit of that as our musicians tried to teach us this morning a song. We began to layer it, and that's how music. Cakes, sushi, my favorite food. It's layered. You're supposed to eat that whole thing in one bite. I realize most of our mouths aren't quite built for that, but that's the way they think about it. It all comes together, so you have this taste experience, and it's a layered experience. Art and movies. So if you are doing anything with photography these days, and you use Photoshop, it talks about the layers, and you can pull out a layer, and that's how special effects are done. Every industry is having to learn this. Why is it in the church we don't think we should know about it? We've got to figure it out as well. Because on Sunday morning, what we've got to do is craft a spiritual experience for people from beginning to end. And it isn't doing one thing all the way through, but it is inviting them into an experience. Because what you're doing is group spiritual direction. Whether you are the pastor or a lay leader or on the worship team, you're doing group spiritual direction. And group spiritual formation, really. And so on Easter Sunday morning, they come into a room that is darkened, and as the service goes along, the sun rises. Because and I don't mean like that clip. I mean you layer stuff until the hallelujah at the end is the hallelujah chorus. Whether or not your church has the musical capacity to sing it, they're singing it in their souls. Their very being is vibrating with the hallelujah chorus because you've layered the experience and brought them to that time. I have pastored a church that had, we would have on Easter Sunday 3,800 people. We average 3,800 people on Easter Sunday morning. We average about 2,200 every single week. More than 1 million people worshiped with us on television and the internet. And then right now I'm pastoring a church where when I arrived at the church on the right, the Virginia Highland Church, 4 years ago this past Sunday, there were 23 people. That was their average attendance. So in the last 5 years of my career, I've had a very wide range of experiences. And what I'm talking about today is not out of the Cathedral of Hope, where a 48-person orchestra played and a 120-person choir sang. I'm talking about the Virginia Highland Church, where I was lucky if 23 people were there on Sunday morning. So how did I take those 23 people and begin to craft the kind of experience that they would begin to not miss a Sunday and to invite others to not miss a Sunday? We're only about 140 to 150 now on Sundays, but that's without a pastor who's ever home. So maybe the solution is for you to put your pastor on the road and keep her or him gone. I don't know, but what I'm saying is that this is the only thing I do there. I'm here today. The only thing I'm doing for them is crafting worship, and I'm doing it a lot with my iPhone and on a plane from somewhere. So all that church's growth is 100% attributable to Sunday worship because that's the only time I'm there. As soon as this is over, I will drive as fast as I can to Boston to catch a plane so I can be there tomorrow morning. That's how I'm leading that church. So I'm not saying that worship is everything, but I'm saying it is a big thing that can be used if we take it seriously. So the church, this is just church, how it's grown, the two churches. Moving on. So your church, my church, we are beautiful people. Everywhere I go, the church is filled with beautiful people like Miss Blanche. And young people who want their children to experience different kinds of values. They are glorious people. You're building, the Episcopalians, you have really good stained glass window. You Congregationalists, your windows are probably clear, but they're really nicely looks, and the pews are really nice, and the wood, and it's all beautiful. It's all wonderful and glorious. The people who sit in the pews and they sing music that of the ages, and they do it well, and they do it from their souls. It means something to them because they sang it with their parents when they were little ones standing up on a pew. And that is all glorious and beautiful. And what I say about it is that our churches, traditional churches, have been like great flower gardens who have brought beauty to the world. And I think that is absolutely true, and the world needs more flower gardens. The problem is that the people we need to come and fill those empty pews, they're not really into flowers so much. We can help them become into flowers. But you remember when you were young, you were just trying to get your silverware to match. You weren't really caring much about flower arrangements around the house. So that's just not where they are yet. So what they're looking for are vegetables. And to tell you the truth, they're looking for some spice in their life. I mean, you may not like, you may not cook with jalapenos. I guarantee you millennials do. And so you've got to figure out how to spice this up for them. What I don't want to have happen is for all of us to come to something like this and go home and rip up all of our flower gardens and plant vegetable gardens. Because that's not what the world needs. And that would lead to martyrdom on your part too. So, but what I am advocating for is that we begin to plant some vegetables in the flower gardens. So you don't have to take worship and make all of your longtime members hate it. But you have to do some things in worship that your longtime members are going to hate. They do not like jalapenos in their salad. And so they'll just have to eat around them. Okay? But if you can help them understand what you're doing, then they'll be all right with that. They'll turn up their nose, they'll grouse about it, but they'll be okay with that. Because what you're doing is trying to get their grandchildren to come back to church. Not their children, they don't care about their children, but their grandchildren to come back to church. They'll let you get away with a lot if that's what you're trying to do. And you've got to begin to do it in worship. That's one of the places you've got to begin to do it. So if you are not doing something every Sunday that your older members hate, I'm just saying, blame it on me. Because we've got to be both hospice chaplains of what is going away in the church, and we've got to be new church obstetricians. There's some new things that are being born that are glorious. And I'm not talking about drums and rock and roll. I am talking about chants like the one that we did, Take, oh take me as I am. But we've got to start learning some new songs, and I mean that metaphorically, in the life of the church. So one of the things that I have done is, in my career, I have pastored. I started when I was 18 years old, and last July I turned 60. So I have been doing this a long time. And every church, from the church that I pastored in South Georgia, those little circuit of Methodist churches, all the way to the Cathedral of Hope and the church I'm pastoring now, every one of them has grown. Now, I just thought that's what churches did. I mean, literally that is true. I don't mean that to be falsely humble. I just thought churches got new pastors and they grew. That was my experience. And then when my denomination started asking me to do this around the country, it was like, I don't know anything about church growth. I mean, because I didn't know what I knew. So what I've had to do is try to figure out, okay, what do I know and how? And what I discovered was I didn't go into a church and upend it and start doing these new funky things. But I actually did take vintage stuff that, you know what vintage is? Let me give you an example. I've got a great example of vintage stuff. So Did your grandmother talk on this kind of phone? I'm seeing some of you probably still have this phone in your house. But, in my grandmother's home, there'd be a rotary dial thing, and you'd pick it up and answer it. And I talked to my grandmother till the day she died at 98 on this very phone, kind of phone. Well, a few years ago, my daughters gave this to me. It was like, okay, that's really weird, but thank you, I guess. What I discovered as I pulled it out of the box was that this vintage phone plugged in to my iPhone. So now I can sit at my desk and talk to you like this and type. Have you ever tried to hold an iPhone like this? This is vintage. This is what I mean by vintage. This is what you've got to do in your church. You've got to figure out how to take very ancient things like Eucharist, like doxologies, like Glorias, and you've got to figure out how to plug them into your iPhone. That's what's got to happen. And that's really what I mean by that. That's what young people are looking for. They're not looking for you to rip out all of the liturgy. Part of what is reclaiming them is the beauty. They want church to look like church and feel like church and smell like church. But they want it to plug into their iPhones, to plug into their lives where they're living them now. So how do you take these very ancient pieces and help younger people, new generations, unchurched people hear and see and experience the holy in a wholly new way? That's your job. And I discovered somehow, it was an unconscious competency, but somehow that's what I had done with every church I'd ever been, was I took the vintage stuff and I re-enlivened it, reimagined it. And one of the ways I did it was that I paired enthusiasm and passion with liturgy and tradition. So what you see in front of you today is what you get on Sunday mornings. I'm excited about church. Now, you may not be an excitable Italian like I am, all right? So you don't want to pretend that you are. But you do want to bring energy and passion. And you don't want to just sing hymns like they don't mean anything. If they mean something, help people remember what they mean. And help them to sing them not from their head or from the page or from the book or from the hymnal, but from the heart. Help them sing that hymn and remember that they sang it at their grandmother's funeral and their voice to tremble with it. And the young person sitting beside them will know there's something holy going on right here. I don't know what it is, but I do need to pay attention to it. Because someday I need these songs, some songs, to speak to my soul, not just my head and my feet. People will get it. You don't have to throw it away, but you do have to give it to them in a way that they can understand it. They can plug it into it. And you've got to be excited about it again. You've got to be excited about church again. You've got to believe that what you have to offer will change the world. Because if it doesn't, what on earth will? And if you don't believe that on Sunday morning, then stay home or go to Starbucks. But if you believe it, then come to church prepared to create, to craft an experience, to offer it to people in a way that can change their lives. And that's what I mean by enthusiasm and passion. So what I tried to do with worship, this is a picture of a Sunday morning at the Cathedral of Hope. What I tried to do every Sunday morning as I worked with this church through an era of AIDS, when people were literally dying there were a dozen times during the 80s and 90s when ambulances came to one of our worship services to pick someone up and take them away. Some of whom died in worship. Young people, young men. So in that setting, we had to have hope and joy, and we had to care about one another. We've got to treat every Sunday morning as if that is true. Because one Sunday morning will be the last time we see Miss Blanche sitting in that pew where she has sat for 89 years. And so tomorrow, if she is there, we've got to do worship like it'll be the last time we worship with her. And sometimes, the people I've buried even at this Virginia Highland Church have been younger people We don't have many older people. So we've got to take it that seriously. So at the Cathedral of Hope, one Sunday morning, so we do communion every Sunday, and so one Sunday morning at the end of communion, we sing these choruses during communion, and the congregation just sings while, because it takes a while for 2,000 people to take communion, and we give them up, they come forward, and we serve communion, and we do it every single Sunday, and then we sing choruses like the ones we sang this morning during this communion time, and then, but we sort of build to the end at some big chorus, so that at the end of communion, when we sing, we pray the final prayer of thanksgiving, the congregation is at that place. They have built to this place of giving thanks. And in that church, it meant something. It was the largest LGBT church in the world. And so it meant something to come and take communion when in that day in Texas, you had been told you weren't even welcome in the building, let alone at the table. And there are a lot of folks in your neighborhood who've been told that, overtly and covertly. Not LGBT folks, divorced Catholics, people who made decisions in their lives, mistakes in their life, who the church has one way or another said, no, not really, you're not really welcome here. And there are lots of folks who just feel that way. So at the end of communion, when people really were welcomed, we say in the UCC, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Well, that's a UCC that meant it. It meant it to the marrow of its bones. And so people never in 22 years did I ever serve communion when someone didn't come forward sobbing. Never. And sometimes I just had to stop. I had to just hand the elements to somebody else and hold them. But that was the experience. Just welcome. And so we would build at the end. And one Sunday, I hadn't been there long. There were probably just only 300 or 400 members back then. One Sunday at communion, we're singing this song. And maybe it was How Great Thou Art. Who knows? It was some song that celebrated. And suddenly, the congregation stood up. And they took one another's hands. And they lifted their hands in the air. It was like, what is this? I'm sitting there thinking, I didn't tell you to stand up. I didn't say take hands. I didn't know. This is not in the bulletin. This is not in the liturgy. This is not they just happened. And then it happened every Sunday forever. They probably still are doing it to this day. I've been gone 5 years, but I bet if you go there Sunday, that's exactly how they'll end communion. It was just a spontaneous liturgical explosion that I was totally unprepared for. And actually, we talked about it because worship team's like, okay, how do we keep that from happening again? I mean, it was like, okay, because what we said was, hey, that's going to make visitors really uncomfortable if we do this every week. And we just tough. I mean, someone in the group was wise enough to say, it's almost the last thing in worship. Probably by then, they've either decided if they're comfortable or not. So, this is probably not going to send them running from the room. So, okay, so they still do it. It is, so when was the last time in your setting God broke out? It wasn't in the bulletin. We've got to make space for that to happen. Because hope and joy and love needs to be the personality of worship every single week. And here we are, this Liberty Church in Virginia Highland, and so what you're seeing there, a picture of is this past Easter, for the very first time in 40 years, 40 people are sitting in the balcony. We didn't even dust the pews. We weren't expecting, it's just filthy up there. No one has sat up there in 40 years. There are no hymnals. There's just oh my God. So the choir is saying, so as I'm saying to the congregation, as I'm welcoming them before the worship begins and doing the announcements, I'm saying to the congregation, okay, there are 40 people in the balcony behind you. Wave at them. And so the choir, we're all waving at the 40 people in the balcony because it's never happened before. But that kind of joy and energy, we've got to invite into our place, and it's what's got to happen. Oh goodness, I'm not even close. So this is what worship looks like at the Virginia Highland Church on Sunday mornings. I said last time I was here that if a church can provide 50 transformational experiences a year, the world will be a path to its door. And I believe that because that's what I said. And I believe if you can believe it, it'll make all the difference in the world. I recommend this book. Robert Schnace, who's a United Methodist bishop, terrible cover, terrible title, but as an author I know you don't get to pick those things. But he says an hour of passionate worship changes all the other hours of the week. And under the influence of weekly worship, people practice looking at the world in a different way, and they rehearse their unique calling as the people of God and their unique identity as the body of Christ. Worship changes people. I believe that. Let me just run through this really quickly because we're almost out of time. You know, we all believe that Jesus said the first commandment was to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourselves. And we've got the head thing down. But we've got to figure out how to do the other parts as well. Worship ought to make us catch our breath. When was the last time you were in worship and someone went, oh, but shouldn't an encounter with the holy do that? Probably if they did it in your place, someone spilled the wine. Or the candle caught somebody's robe on fire or something. There needs to be more of just encounters with the holy. This is the key that I always say. Enthusiasm is not the enemy of intellect. Okay, we know you're smart. Episcopalians, Congregationalists, we are all smart. All right. But it doesn't mean you can't be enthusiastic. I'm going to just move on really quickly. Even you have sports teams about whom you are enthusiastic. People's lives are transformed by an experience with God, not information about God. We have got to make that shift, particularly in worship. I know there are challenges, and I'm just going to skip on right past them. I'm sorry. I know. I just had way too much material. So we've got to figure out how to reach new markets. There are no more pilgrims coming over UCC. You've got to figure out a way to get these millennials to come back to church, and the Anglican Church has got to do this. And if I'm just sorry, I'm just going to say to you Episcopalians this. What were you thinking? The last 10 years, 15 million Americans left the Roman Catholic Church. Where do you think they should have gone? I'm just saying. Now it's too late because they've got Francis. So you've got to figure out a way to come up with your own Francis, I'm afraid. So worship has got to serve like Jesus. We call that piece of bread the host, and worship has got to act as if we are the host, not the guest with worship. We've got to recalculate and reinvent worship authentically. Okay, let's see. I've just got to move on. I missed all this. Sorry, sorry. You're just missing it all. All right. So I want to just say, it isn't about style. I know that the Episcopal folks in the room, they do transcendent worship really well. And some of our Congregationalists, we do immanence really well. That God is present here in this meeting house, and God is present in the parking lot, and God is present at work equally. The transcendent folks, this is a holy place. This is a special place. It is a unique place where we encounter God. Both of those things are true. And both of those things need to happen in worship. So it isn't that one is right and one is wrong. It is that we've got to figure out ways to bring both of those things together. What we don't need is this sort of pablum, this boiled down, the worst of all possible worlds. And that's what happens all too often in our churches. Sometimes we think we're too small to do some exciting things. Sometimes, I don't know, but this sort of unremarkable mediocrity in worship has got to go. Think about Apple. I read just this week that, they used to put Sears stores in malls because people would go to the mall to shop at Sears and then they'd shop at other places. Right. Now they put Apple stores in malls because it is what attracts people. We've got to create worship in such a way that it is what attracts people into our building, and then they get involved in spiritual formation, in mission, in caring for the poor, in doing all of these other wonderful things. But we've got to figure out how to make and it doesn't mean it has got to be slick, but it's got to be deliberate. Lyle Schaller, who was my mentor, said that our chief role in these seasons is to help people be comfortable with change and to remind people that the good old days weren't really all that good after all. And that the times when church was big and booming, it didn't really have to do with the way you did worship in the 1950s. It had to do with the fact that women came to church and started doing things that hadn't ever been done before, starting programs, working missions, making church work in a powerful and dynamic way. And Lyle says, if we wake up tomorrow and it's the 1950s again, your church is ready. But if you wake up tomorrow and it's the 21st century, you've got to figure out how to do worship in the 21st century. Remember the phone. You don't have to throw it out, but you got to make it plug into an iPhone for people. I went to the Virginia High Church and this is what it looked like. 23 people in a building that was falling down. This Easter Sunday, that's what it looked like. 287 people in worship. We are preparing for 350 this year. And I just want to say, if we can do it, so can you. They don't pay me. Actually, I take that back. They're now paying me $20,000 a year to be their pastor. They don't have any money. They don't have any endowment. The building was falling down. None of those things could be an excuse. And the only thing we really fixed well was Sunday morning worship. And it's made all the difference in the world, as you can see. Hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things. I think that's what worship has got to be about. We've got to give people hope, that they can make it across the border, that they can shake the hands of their friends and loved ones. We have to give them hope. And my prayer is that you'll begin to craft worship in ways that will do that. This afternoon we're going to talk about some very specific ways to do that. And I hope you'll be ready to learn. And I'll talk faster, I promise, this afternoon. I thank you all. God bless you.